Welcome back. It's the Connor Happer Show. I almost said unsportsmanlike conduct. I've done such a good job today, and I almost said it there, but it is indeed the Connor Happer Show. I'm Josh Peterson, and today for Connor, he'll be back a week from today. And right now we go to the 42 Degrees The Source hotline and welcome on from the Omaha World Herald and HuskerExtra.com. It's Sam McKewon. Sam, how are you?
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Nothing, man. Good to have you on. You know, it's funny, Sam. I was going to ask you about the practice being completely closed down. You wrote about it in the rewind. You said I was at practice leaks from Saturday's scrimmage slowed to a drip. And I was going to point out, that was pretty interesting that happened. And then the video comes out from Chasing Three, and Matt Rhule acknowledges that some of these players, I guess, are struggling in front of family members and friends. What have you made of Rhule's acknowledgement of that, given that not even 3 weeks from now there'll be 80,000 people inside the stadium?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair comparison. First of all, the roster is really big, and so it's 120 guys, but it's really, so you figure parents and you figure former players and you figure a lot of other things out there. And all of a sudden your scrimmages, especially if they're in the stadium, and I don't think it was, I think it was out on the field, but all of a sudden you're just getting a whole bunch of people out there. And I think there's just a sense of, gotta dial this thing in a little bit, need to look at who's going to play and who's not. This is the first scrimmage. The second scrimmage next week, you kind of make what you call that cut line.
Yeah.
You kind of say, all right, here's who we're going to have up and here's who we're going to have down. And again, they're going to have a 145-man roster. And the way they built it is they always intended on, they're not going to say it, but there's going to be guys who leave because they're scholarship guys who are also not going to play. And so, we'll see if there's any departures even before the season. I don't know that there will be, but so I think they're trying to really dial into, okay, who's going to be with us, who's going to be in that first couple of groups and who isn't. I think there's certainly a sense of wanting to make sure that everybody's concentrating and focusing. And again, when you have that many guys, you're trying to kind of work through everything that you've got to get done. And, I thought it was an interesting thing that he said to us, and then in the Chasing Three, there's just a lot of rabbit ears around this program. One of the first questions I asked Matt when he had taken the job, I think it was like February or March of 23, as I said, there's just so many people around here, and there's so many chefs in the kitchen, and there's so many people who just want to help. And they want to be around all the time, and they all have ideas. And how are you going to learn how to winnow out? And how are you going to learn how to say no? And he felt pretty confident about his ability to do that. And he kind of cited some of his time in Carolina. And I said, well, that's not exactly what I mean. I don't mean critics. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people around that just kind of want to be involved, and they want to hang around, and they want to be around it. And they don't really care if you win. They just kind of like being associated with it. And I think they're working through that. I think that's going to be a journey for this massive staff and for this team. And, I don't think the 105-man rule will hurt Nebraska. The other people have said it will. And I'm like, maybe short term, but long term, I think that'll actually suit everybody in the room a little bit. They've got to find a way to tighten this thing up a little bit. They're very generous with their time, and they're very generous with the media. But I get a sense that Saturday was about, all right, we need to tighten the chin strap and actually go into, this season really, really intentional about winning football games. And in the Chasing Three doc, he even said the thing about, what feels really good? Winning, especially against a good team. They're turning the corner. The whole, we built the culture and let's pat everybody on the back for walking and chewing gum at the same time, is we're moving past that era.
Sam McKewon joining us. So along those lines, Sam, what do you make of him including that in the video? Obviously, he has final say. Like, that could have been something that was left to guess about, or maybe it gets out in drips and drabs, right? Where people hear one story and a game of telephone turns the speech into something else entirely. Why do you think include that, such a public comment, and then to have his own comment again this weekend? I mean, they obviously go together. What did you think about it in the video?
That's a good point. I think there's a kind of trying to get clear with that he's trying to protect the team. And I think part of the message that he gets is like the world that we live in today, these, and I have a 16-year-old daughter. you're inundated with stuff all the time. Like, you're really never insulated. It feels like, from the outside world. It's always just pressing in. And so I think there was just a kind of acknowledgement of, like, we're going to protect the team. You guys have said something. I'm responding to it. I want you to know that I hear what you're saying. And boy, is that an easy thing to hear too. Like, oh, you guys don't want anybody else around? Okay, that works for me. Like, that coach wants to hear that at the end of the day. Like, the minute that your players say, hey, can we like actually get some of these folks out of here? A coach is not going to hesitate to say yes, because, I think a lot of what Rhule does is nation building. He's just trying to build relationships with the various, constituencies of Nebraska football without pissing a lot of people off. But the primary goal is to serve your players, and I think that's what he was trying to do when he said it.
Sam McKewon of the Omaha World Herald and HuskerExtra.com joining us right now on the Connor Happer Show. Sam, I really loved what you wrote in the Rewind this weekend. You said, with 3 weeks left before Nebraska's most important season in years, the Huskers are in get better mode, where Rhule wants to be. I love it because, every season is big in its own way, right? Whether it's year 1 for Frost or year 5 for Frost. But the fork in the road big seasons, I think, are all the more fascinating. I wonder if you could expand on why this one maybe stands out to you more than some of the others in recent vintage. And I'm guessing some of it goes with the conversation we've already had so far today.
Yeah, and some of it is related to what's coming in this sport. The revenue sharing model that's coming, how you're going to have to recruit, the value of winning. Like, we're running out of years where you can keep saying, well, they'll get it next year. No, this is the year to get it. As I rattle off those teams, UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, Indiana, as I roll those off, those are the teams you got to beat if you want to go where you want to go. And so there's no sugarcoating that. I'm not disrespecting Rutgers. I actually think Rutgers may come in here and win. I think that's an awfully good team that's coached by a good guy, and I think they're gonna give Nebraska a hard time. But some of those other teams that I just mentioned, if you are who you say you are, you're gonna win those games at some point. You're gonna beat those teams. When Rhule was at Baylor, that means beating Kansas, and that means beating Iowa State, and that means beating Texas Tech. These are fine programs, led by good guys, but at the end of the day, you have to find a way to elevate. And so I think that's part of what we're looking at. And so there's that. And I think there's also, he wants to keep on the right trajectory. There's a quarterback here who obviously wants to be good and wants to play for winning teams. And, is probably not going to have a ton of patience with 3-9 or 4-8. And you have to also look at your roster and just, hey, there's a bunch of guys coming back this season. They came back for this year, and you want to do it right for them. Ty Robinson and Isaac Gifford and a bunch of other guys. And so, there just feels like a lot of weight going into this season. I think they've felt it. They've dialed back some of the public appearances outside of the media stuff, and this feels a lot like 2019 when Nebraska had a chance to take off. And, they just didn't handle that off season very well. And, I'm sure Scott would love back whole games of the 2019 season. And a lot of that was on him. That wasn't on anybody else. What happened that season. And, you can't blame COVID or any of that stuff. They blew it in 2019. And I think Nebraska is on that cusp again. They have an opportunity to have a very good season this year, good being defined by 7 or 8 wins. And to fall short of that would be pretty disappointing for everybody involved.
Sam, you mentioned Dylan Raiola, and I wanted to ask you about him, and I wanted to do it through the lens of you being a Bears fan, because they are entering their own unique season in terms of the discourse that is going to surround their quarterback, right? With just the ones that you have watched throughout much of your fandom, and given how different he seems, I was thinking about it this morning, not certainly trying to compare them as quarterbacks, but more the situations. Dylan Raiola is entering a situation where he will be wholly unique compared to anything that we have seen around here in our lifetimes. Like, I wonder how you think the program is going to handle all that. I think they've done a very good job this offseason, like trying to make sure that he is in the background, because once he is not anymore, once he has taken that first snap, like, he is the story, right? Of whether it's your game or after UTEP, the post game shows, he is going to be the talking point all year long. How do you think they're going to handle that?
That's a great question. For one thing, I think Dylan is a little bit ahead of the game in handling this stuff. I think he comes from a family that's talked to him about it, and I think that probably helps. So I don't think this is Johnny Manziel, who obviously had no idea what he was doing when he was thrust into that spotlight. I think Dylan has handled the couple interviews that he's had pretty well. And by that, I don't mean that he's a robot. He's got a little bit of a personality. I don't think he's afraid to be himself around people. You see him at practice, not afraid to be himself. He does some things that some of the other quarterbacks don't do. And I think they've done a pretty good job of keeping things where they need to keep them. We haven't peppered them with question after question about Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think it's certainly going to be a story once he starts. And here's the thing. At some point this upcoming season, he's going to have a great game. And then he's going to have a game where he struggles. And the game where he struggles is the one where you're going to watch, okay, how does he handle adversity and how does he bounce back from that? There were a couple circumstances last year where after the games, the Nebraska quarterbacks didn't talk. We're not going to talk. Yep, didn't talk. They just didn't want to talk. I don't know. It's hard for me to tell exactly what it was, but late in the season, when they lost some games, and when somebody's hurt, and I'm like, yeah, I understand that somebody's hurt, but like they got ice on their knee, they can come talk, that kind of stuff. And there was a lot of those kind of games late, and you just can't do that when you want to be QB1 of a prominent program. And again, where Dylan wants to go, Dylan's vision is greater than just being here. And so, like, everything he does is a preparation for what he wants to do in the pros. And so you handle yourself a certain way here. And I think his parents have talked to him about that. Like, if you want to be this, then you have to come here and handle this like this. And I think Matt Rhule would not have him here if they weren't confident, because they don't have a bunch of 5-stars. If they weren't confident that Dylan could handle things the way that Rhule wants him to, I don't think he would be at Nebraska. I think he'd be at Georgia sitting behind Carson Beck. That's what I think. And so, obviously, to be here at Nebraska, everybody knew he was going to be the starter the first year. They haven't named that officially, but I think that's going to happen. So he knew coming here, he'd have to be ready to handle it all right away. If he had wanted to go to Georgia and do the 1-year thing where you redshirt and then you're like all the other NFL quarterbacks who play in year 2, he could have done that. And he would have sat there and, held his hands to his shoulder pads and watched Carson Beck win the Heisman. But he wanted to come here and do this instead, so he needs to be ready, and I think he will be.
One more for me, Sam. Do you think they've settled on the number 2 quarterback?
I don't think that's been settled yet. I think and it's almost contingent.
Yeah.
On, do you feel like there may be a difference between number 2 and guy who comes in late when Nebraska's way ahead? I think guy who comes in late when Nebraska's way ahead may well be Jalen Granstad. I think you can make that leap. I think you want to protect Danny Kalen's red shirt. I think that'd be the right thing to do. Simultaneously, if you feel like you can use Heinrich Haarberg in your offense in some ways that aren't playing quarterback, having a number 2 named Jalen Granstad can help you with that. Now, nobody's saying that Dylan's going to get banged up, okay? No one wants that to happen. That would be horrible. If it happened, I think Heinrich Haarberg would be the number 2 quarterback. Like Adrian Martinez got banged up in his first career game when the guy from Colorado twisted his knee. Andrew Bunch came in, right, for against Troy, and they lost the game not entirely because of Andrew, not even specifically because of, but you would have loved to have had a Heinrich Haarberg to lean on who could run. And so Heinrich can run, and I think Heinrich could be your guy that comes in and says, okay, if somebody gets hurt and somebody's out for 5 or 6 games, then all of a sudden it's like, well, Heinrich might be our guy because he can do some things that maybe Gramstad can't. But it's hard to say. If Gramstad comes along really quickly here, maybe you can run a modified version of what they want to run, especially with a quick passing game. He's kind of your Noah Vedral a little bit. I think that's a fair comparison for Gramstad, and Haarberg is Haarberg. Everybody knows what he's going to bring to the table. And so Nebraska would have to make a choice if Dylan wasn't available. But I do think that Gramstad can be your backup if Dylan's healthy and good. And you know what? You're up 38-10 against UTEP in the fourth quarter. trot your 5-star over to the sideline and pull the NAIA All-American and put him out there. That's what I would do, but they'll decide for themselves.
Should be interesting. 19 days away. Sam, always appreciate getting a chance to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great week.
Take care, man.